What's your story?
What does accessibility mean to you?
How can technology contribute to greater inclusivity?
accessiBe Spotlight Sessions.
In collaboration with Columbia Lighthouse for the Blind's digital series, Where Are We Now?
Featuring John Kemp, the president and CEO of Lakeshore Foundation. Hello and welcome to our first episode of Where Are We Now and Spotlight Sessions collaboration podcast. Together, the Columbia Lighthouse for the Blind and accessiBe are working side by side to foster a better understanding and empathy between the blind and business communities. We are highlighting the challenges, triumphs, and daily realities faced by people who are blind, visually impaired, and persons with disabilities. And we will be exploring the latest trends, technologies, and policies that are shaping a more inclusive digital world and accessible future for all. My name is Josh Basil, and I'm your co-host for today's show. I'm a C4-5 quadriplegic, paralyzed below my shoulders, and a power wheelchair user. I'm the community relations manager at accessiBe and a passionate disability rights advocate and trial attorney focused on bringing down barriers to access and inclusion for people with disabilities.
I'm Jocelyn Hunter, your other co-host for today's show. During my senior year of high school, I was diagnosed with a rare retinal disease, and as a result, I am visually impaired. I am Senior Director of Communications at Columbia Lighthouse for the Blind. CLB is a nonprofit serving the Washington, D.C. region through programs and services for people of all ages who are blind or visually impaired.
Today, we will be talking with John Kemp, a renowned disability rights advocate and sought-after global speaker. John was born with a congenital defect, resulting in limb loss of both of his arms and legs. He is a highly accomplished executive with many accomplishments in the corporate and nonprofit world. John is a co-founder of the American Association of People with Disabilities. In 2021, John took on the role of president and CEO of Lakeshore Foundation, which is a nonprofit rehabilitation center offering state-of-the-art fitness, recreation, athletic, and educational programs to people with disabilities. It serves as an Olympic and Paralympic training site, strengthening the ongoing commitment to the development of parasports across the U.S. Thank you so much for joining us, John, and welcome to the Where Are We Now and Spotlight Sessions collaboration podcast.
Thank you, Josh, and thank you, Jocelyn. It's a privilege to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you,
It's gonna be a
John,
great
and
episode.
welcome. John,
Thank you.
before the passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act on July 26, 1990, what was it like to live in the U.S. with a physical or visual disability?
Very, very difficult. It was a very difficult lifestyle. It was one where we were always beholden to the kindness and generosity of others, and we really had no civil rights backbone, so to speak, to where we could rely upon legal authority that we had a right to be participating in all aspects of society. So we were very much beholding, and that was not a healthy kind of way to start. But it was the evolution of our civil rights, and it had to start somewhere. So thank goodness there were a couple of constitutional law cases brought in the early 70s, 68 and 70, that created the foundation for the right to public education for kids with disabilities. And then all of a sudden, the power of the law became something that people with disabilities and advocates started embracing and realizing we need to get some legislation to add on to the constitutional aspects of the law. And that's where we came about with the Rehab Act of 1973, and later in 1990, the Americans with Disabilities Act, as further amended.
It's amazing that you kind of you lived and breathed the disability rights movement. Like, it must have been just such it's a hard time, but a special time to be a part of.
John, thank you for sharing that enlightening story, that piece of history. And it touches on my question relevant to what it was like on that day when the ADA was signed into law. Do you remember where you were and how it made you feel?
I remember everything about that day. I had just moved from Chicago, where I was working with the National Easter Seal Society organization, to become the CEO of United Cerebral Palsy Associations. And that was on like June 13th. And by July 26th, 3,000 people with disabilities converged at the invitation of the White House, converged on the South Lawn to watch President Bush signed into law the Americans with Disabilities Act. And it was as festive a time as I have ever seen in the disability community, where the fractures and the factions of disability organizations didn't matter. We had all come together for one big party to essentially celebrate the fact that President Bush the first was, and we watched him sign it into law. And we were just like starstruck. There were 25 senators and 30 members of the House of Representatives, the members of his cabinet, the leadership of the disability rights movement, all there, and including the business community, which was a very important part of the movement. So I've got to say, it was festive. And unfortunately, that amazing day with all of us together, shortly thereafter, all just dissipated. And we could not get that group back together again to really be a political and economic force. And that really led Paul Hearn and me to create the American Association of People with Disabilities, which was to get a hold of the economic and political power of people with disabilities and to be able to have a more unified voice.
There's no doubt being able to bring our voices together. It's like we're strong with our voices because we have powerful stories to tell, but together our voices can be that much louder. So I love what AAPD has done and is continuing to do, because it's, so many times with the disability community we fight for kind of our unique world, but we have so much in common, so much in overlapping. If we can come together, we can do that much more. So, and John, I love that this party that you talk about. I think I was 5 years old at the time, but I would have loved it at that party, dancing and having fun. And I love that you talked about the business community. Before 1990, businesses functioned mostly in a physical world, and now 33 years later, businesses are more than ever functioning in an ever expanding digital world. In your opinion, why is it essential that businesses not only comply with the ADA, but create a culture of inclusion and accessibility?
Well, the most important reason, and it's very self-serving to business, but that's what businesses are supposed to do. They're supposed to generate net profits and reward their investors, their shareholders. So they're battling all the time for market share and profitability. And they do that through primarily human talent. And if people with disabilities are not included in the talent pool, then we are not able to contribute meaningfully to the overall success of the businesses that are out there. To think that businesses would arbitrarily or maybe unintentionally exclude 10 to 15% of the total population simply because they wouldn't update their processes, their business processes, the accessibility of their digital communications and information sources and services, and improve their benefits and the stickiness that get people in and keep them there, such as mental health services and mindfulness, and not only the physical accessibility, but all of these other things. Business has a huge investment, I think, to make in the disability community. They're still slow. You'll get the progressive companies that are really way ahead, and Accenture did an incredibly smart study that showed that those companies that were adopting inclusive policies were profiting greatly and to a much better extent than those companies that were not including and preparing to include people with a variety of disabilities. So it's proven now that if you go after talent, you better be ready to include them. And when you are, you're going to gain. You skim off the top of the applicant pool or the advancement pool, the very best people possible, and now you've got an even better workforce. And the issue of accommodations, I'll just say quickly, we accommodate everybody always. If somebody comes in and says, I've got a 4 o'clock appointment and I have to leave early because I've got to go see my psychologist, or they don't even have to tell you really the reason, and you say, sure, go right ahead. I need a lamp because I need task lighting to brighten up my workplace. Sure, buy it. Go right ahead. I need a 5-pronged chair to be able to sit on so I don't fall off my chair and injure myself. Sure, buy it. But then because we borrowed from the religious discrimination area and brought over reasonable accommodations, all of a sudden it's codified in law and everybody seems to want to fight about it. Oh, that's too much, and how much is too much, and how can we afford this? We accommodate everybody, and that's the way businesses should look at it. Accommodate every employee, whether they have a disability or not.
And everything you just said, it's, in my opinion, I wish we could change it, the word accommodation, to performance enhancer. Because everything you just said allows your employees to perform at the highest abilities or to get the services they need to be the best employee. So
Absolutely. It benefits everybody.
Yes, and John, I echo Josh's sentiment, and those were really strong examples of how accommodations are, accomplished in the general workplace for people without disabilities, and having that same awareness and willingness to support the accommodations of people with disabilities who can really add value and unique perspectives to places of employment. Columbia Lighthouse for the Blind, remains dedicated to training people for gainful employment with our government contracts, and also making sure that we have diverse representation within the organization itself of decision makers and other individuals who are blind or visually impaired to well represent our organization and the mission. So it's very important. Thank you, John.
Great. You're welcome.
As an executive leader serving both for profit and nonprofit companies, what are your thoughts on the intersection of the ADA and business growth and productivity? I know you have really given us
Um,
really some great insight. Are there some other specifics that resonate well with you as you reflect on your illustrious career?
well, thank you. I think that business, there's good business in providing good information to businesses about people with disabilities and how all people with disabilities, or most people with disabilities, have the capability of working, whether it be remotely or in an office environment. Sometimes getting to and from work is very difficult for some people, and remote working has become, thanks to COVID, in a very perverse way. We've learned how remote working is so valuable, and now we have a whole generation emerging of workers
Mhm.
who really feel like I can work remotely, whether I have a disability or not, and I want to be able to manage my work-life balance, and I want to be able to do these kinds of things. Well, all of these activities are opportunities for people with disabilities to be hired. We work at about half the rate of employment that non-disabled individuals work at. We have just a very low labor force participation rate, even 33, 34 years after the passage of the ADA. It's just embarrassing. And I'm surprised that people with disabilities aren't out in the streets marching and causing havoc over the disparity in the employment rates. So it's really very, very difficult. And I think business is missing out and on a lot of talent. So I know that the progressive companies who engage companies like Inclusively, I'll just pick out one, a technology platform, where they have realized that they started with the disability community and they're now offering their services to benefit all employees. So they talk about building their workforce, but they also talk about retaining the workforce. You spend a lot of time and money, companies spend a lot of time and money training their employees and investing in them, and they don't want them leaving after 2 years to go for a nickel more or a dollar more down the street to get a different job. So it's really about building and retaining your workforce, and that includes people with disabilities and being much more flexible.
I love that. The disability community is proven statistically to be the most brand loyal, but also from a retention standpoint of businesses, loyal to the businesses they work for.
Yes.
So I love that you brought that up. And I'd love to ask, how should businesses be thinking and approaching accessibility when comparing kind of their physical storefronts to that of their websites and digital assets?
Well, if you want my money and you want our money, you're going to make your place accessible physically and digitally to the greatest extent possible. The only real power that we have as a movement, a disability movement, is with our bucks. Yeah, there's a lot of poverty and disability, a lot, too much. And believe me, we want jobs. And for those of us who are working, we have some discretionary money to be able to buy things, but I refuse to buy from companies that I feel are not making themselves accessible, both physically and digitally, and practice disability employment inclusion. I just won't give them my money. It's my only tool of power that I've got is like I'm not going to give you my money. So if you want my money, you're going to have to make yourself accessible to me and to all of my friends and my colleagues in the disability community. I think it's an economic argument that we can talk about doing the right thing. Well, we talked about doing the right thing in the 60s and the 50s and the 40s, and it didn't get us very far. And we finally ended up having to resort to some civil rights. But there's a whole movement now, I think, that we should be acknowledging, and that is there's a big upside to disability, to enhancing the workplace and society, and contributing much broader thinking about how we serve all people by including people with disabilities. And I love the fact that Tammy, I forgot her last name, Senator from Illinois, Duckworth. Thank you.
Yep.
Senator Duckworth has run and is there and is speaking on our behalf on issues about disability, whether it's her particular disability of losing her legs as a helicopter pilot, or it's blindness. It's to me having representation, and I think there's a big upside to what it contributes to the quality of the workplace and the quality of society is by having disability representation.
John, thank you for those words, that messaging. I share that feeling of the need for greater inclusivity and representation within the workplace, within community, within businesses, because otherwise, unfortunately, many people who have no knowledge or access to people with disabilities or even a specific disability, like someone who's visually impaired, they may be apt to overlook that particular constituency or demographic. Keeping on this theme of business engagement, how do businesses become accessible? So, for example, we might have entrepreneurs and businesses listening right now, and they want to join this effort. How can they join this effort? What do you recommend, John, as a next step for the businesses listening in today?
There's an axiom that started years ago, and Jim Charlton in Chicago wrote a book called Nothing About Us Without Us. And today that's been shortened to Nothing Without Us. And so when I think about how do you get started, you better find some people with disabilities who can be your voice, your conscience, let's say it better that way, your conscience on how you are including people, all people, and respecting their differences, and including everyone. So I would find organizations such as yours to be a consultant and a volunteer with your organizations. I also think when I say volunteer, I say that carefully because I think for all too long, people with disabilities have been giving away their disability expertise and knowledge, and that we devalue ourselves by just constantly giving away our information. Yes, I want people with disabilities to be included, but I also want people to say there's value, and you'll pay a consultant to advise you on a whole host of things, from safety and equipment, purchasing things. I think people with disabilities deserve the opportunity economically to be hired and to be advisors to companies. But I would first look at those, engaging those individuals. Then I'd start making sure that my employment policies included people with disabilities in the catchment area,
Mhm.
and then hiring them in. And believe me, we've now had a generation plus of kids going to school with disabled kids in public schools, and they're graduating from high school and college together, and they're going out into the community, and disabled young people are not getting hired, and they're obviously being excluded. So I think that the younger generation of workers today are wondering, where are disabled people? I went to school with them. I don't see them in the workplace. There's something still going on that's wrong. So I would say mere presence and brings about the inclusion, and then making sure that your policies are as inclusive as possible.
Thank you, John. That was a very thorough and thoughtful next step recommendation for businesses, entrepreneurs listening and wanting to know how to get started, how to make that connection. Thank you, John, for joining this episode of Where Are We Now and Spotlight Sessions Collaboration Podcast.
And John, yes, I cannot say enough. Thank you so much for your time and all that you do for the community.
It was my pleasure to be with you both. I think the world of you both, and here's to a wonderful future together.
Thanks, John. And for all of our guests, thank you so much for staying to the end. And please take a moment to check out CLB's Where Are We Now digital series by visiting the CLB YouTube page. And you can learn more about accessiBe and the Columbia Lighthouse for the Blind by subscribing on YouTube and following us on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Find us on our handles at accessiBe_community and at Columbia Lighthouse. We're looking forward to the next episode. Bye, everyone. Thanks, John. Thanks, Jonathan. Or thanks, Jocelyn.